Hello, Neil here, and in this video we're going to answer a question: what AWS service for my startup? We're going to cover most of the services that AWS offer, how many of them are useful to your startup, how many of them shouldn't distract you, and maybe by the end of the video we'll answer the question of what services you need. Let's get into it. AWS are a helpful bunch when it comes to selling their services. They provide a number of diagrams on their website. These are grouped under AWS architecture diagrams. You can search for a number of different solutions, vertical examples, and other products and how they fit together to provide a solution. These architecture diagrams can be quite complicated, like this one. Apparently, serverless is easy. Although I look at this diagram and I think, what the hell's going on here? Okay, there's a lot of AWS products on this diagram. Some of them you'll need as a startup. Like most of the documents and the AWS architect diagrams, they're designed for scalability. I often say on this channel, one of the benefits of the cloud is scalability. Being able to scale up as well as down to match your customer demand. With the right architecture, we can provide a minimal service and scale up to a very large service. As a startup, however, you might be in the initial phase. In my recent video of software development lifecycle, we go through the inception phase, which is very much on inception, understanding the product, understanding the customers and what they want. From that phase, we should create a prototype. A prototype is probably a bit early to be looking at AWS services. Later in this video, I'll share with you an architecture diagram that's as simple as it gets. It may be suitable for your very early starts. But to answer the question, I can say it depends. What are you building? Are you building a DevOps platform? Are you providing a web application? Maybe a mobile application? Or are we dealing with an artificial intelligence construct of some description? Let's start with an example that I hope you've heard of. WordPress. Out of the box, WordPress will quite happily work within one Docker container. Maybe two if you include the MySQL database. Here's AWS's architecture diagram of how to host a highly available and scalable WordPress. In fact, this diagram can host any web application. It doesn't have to be WordPress. Right in the middle, we can see there's an instance. That instance can be configured with whatever programming language you want, whatever dependencies your application needs. This picture uses three tiers. We have a public internet-facing tier, where the load balancers and firewalls and stuff are. A middle tier, where the application server actually does its stuff. And a back-end tier, where the database and the data is stored. In this example, when hosting WordPress, we have to provide it with a file system. So we can do that with Elastic File System, which is an NFS share on your server. This allows us to share a file system across a number of EC2 instances. With the EC2 instances and EFS set up, we then look to the database. In this diagram, AWS have suggested we use Aurora, which is PostgreSQL or MySQL compatible database. It can run in a serverless mode as well as an on-demand or reserved mode. In the middle, you'll see memcached. This is an in-memory cache for page requests. Allows us to run and rerun the same request to pages and provide a faster response. On the left of the diagram, we've got an internet gateway for the receiving internet traffic. We've got an application load balancer, so it can share the load across the instances. And we've got a NAT gateway, so that the instances can return the responses back to the customers. The NAT gateway is required here because the application servers are in a private subnet. If we're in a public subnet, then we forgo a little bit of security, but the instances can talk directly back to the customers. The other two services on this diagram are Route 53 for DNS. Not strictly necessary here, but you need a domain and you need DNS, so it's got to be provided by someone. And Amazon CloudFront, which works with Route 53 to provide cached outputs. Amazon CloudFront is particularly useful if you've got static content, as there is on WordPress sites, images and whatnot, and it can serve those directly without even hitting the instance. In this diagram, it's a hotel reservation system. It's in several parts and uses serverless components throughout. In the first part, number 1, this is the admin backend. This is for the staff to use when they're running a hotel, see what bookings there are and stuff like that. Looking at number 2, this is a back-end system that stores the inventory for the shop. Number 3 is the front end for the shop. Rather than going through CloudFront and a load balancer to an EC2 instance as we had in the server example before, this uses a serverless approach. So we hit API Gateway, which then talks to an AWS Lambda, quickly run a serverless function against something to return a result. When a customer searches for something, this in turn can hit another backend function, our inventory that we looked at just now, or just return something from a caching database. There's also an S3 bucket in here to store the static content. In step 4, the booking process, we got the similar components. We got the API gateway going to a Lambda. The Lambda then references the S3 bucket for the static content, DynamoDB for customer specific information, and Amazon have even sneaked in Kinesis here should you want to have reporting based on the events. If we look at the pricing block below the sales block, you'll see it says serverless microservice. This follows exactly the same pattern as the others. We've got a front-end web interface, which is the API gateway. It hands control over to an AWS Lambda, which with an S3 bucket for the static content and DynamoDB for a database, can return whatever it wants. On the right-hand side, very similar. They've mixed it up slightly though, by providing a Fargate task rather than just using a Lambda. AWS Fargate is where you run your own containers, but still serverless. From these examples, you can see that AWS provide a lot of services that all somewhat compete with each other, whether you want to go down the serverless route or the server route. The server route can be a single instance, it can be EC2 running the ECS agent if you want Docker, or you can go down the serverless route, where we've got API gateways processing requests going to an AWS Lambda or an ECS task. Whether you go for serverless or server is up to you. One major factor on that will be what language your application is written in. Serverless only supports a number of languages natively. If you're going for serverless and want to run Lambda, then your choices are Java, Golang, Node.js, Python, and Ruby. Notice there's no PHP in this list. If you want to run PHP, then you need to either go for serverless route, is ECS, provide your own Docker container. You can add a layer to Lambda to provide PHP, and the server route is to install a server with whatever you want, in this case PHP. So getting started with AWS is pretty easy. You just need a few tools, like web browser if you're going to go through the console, or because this is DevOps, we're on automation tools, so Terraform or CloudFormation, somewhere to store the source code, GitHub, GitLab, your own Git server. And if you're new to AWS, there is the free tier, which gives you access to free stuff for 12 months. So you better have your bank account ready after that. So the answer is, it depends. It depends on how fast you want to scale. My recommendation is do a prototype first. Then once you've got a known product, you then know how much to scale. Choice of services depend on whether you want to go for the server approach, the load balancer and EC2 instances, or the serverless approach, Lambda and ECS Fargate. And AWS isn't cheap, apart from that first year. When you fall off that tier, it can be quite a shock for the first bill, so be careful. So to finish off, I promised a small scale project. If you want to start small, or put your prototype out there, then this is about as small a setup as you can get away with. It looks quite similar to the WordPress example, only I've left off Route 53. We still have the internet gateway, that's what receives the traffic. I've included an application load balance here because it's easier to put it in at this stage. But if we're destroying and restarting environments, then you can add it later. These all sit within a VPC. Within the VPC, we've got a zone, and inside the zone, we've got a couple of subnets. A public one, this is where our web-facing internet server is, and a private one, this is where we keep the data, the database. No doubt you will have some static assets as well, and so there's an S3 bucket for those. As experts in AWS and scaling, We've worked for large clients and small clients. If you like this video, I'd appreciate a like. And of course, if you've got an opinion on what setup you should have for your startup, please tell me about it in the comments below. Till next time.